An 80% increase in the real estate fallout rate here in Denver. What is going on? Hey everybody, it's Alyson Wall, your real estate strategist and realtor for the South Denver area. In Denver right now, about 35% of homes that have gone under contract are falling out and coming back to market. So we're talking about 1 in 3 homes terminating. This is far above the pre-pandemic average of 15%. And of course, we consider pre-pandemic to be our normal. If I had compared where we are today to the pandemic era of less than 10% fallout rate, this statistic would be so much different even than the 80% increase we're talking about right now. So why is this happening? And sellers, importantly, what can you be doing to prevent this from happening to you? We are seeing 2 sources in these buyer terminations, physical and financial. Let's tackle them one by one. Most terminations are happening, as you might expect, at the inspection phase. So there are a couple different reasons. We have buyer and seller incongruency on what is going on. We may have a buyer go to inspection and not present any findings and terminate. When that happens, oftentimes we think that the buyer has just gotten cold feet, right? They have kept looking. I've talked about this in my videos. We have a lot of wandering eyes on our buyers right now because we have very high inventory. And in many cases, unless we're in certain segments of the market where there is high demand and not enough going around, maybe it's a certain school district between 1 and 1.2 million and it's a move-in ready house on open space and those rarely show up, buyers don't tend to wander there. But if it's in a segment with a lot of opportunity, just because the buyer went under contract, it honestly doesn't mean they've stopped looking. So if we get that piece, no claims of, I want you to fix this, it's usually cold feet. When we have an inspection request come in, buyer and seller can't agree, well, then it's stalemate. It's a lack of ability to negotiate. It's 2 demanding parties. And then sometimes it is just the fact that we have a house that has a lot going on. Maybe the seller doesn't have the bandwidth financially, bandwidth mentally, physically, all sorts of things going on the seller front where they don't have the ability to put all of that money in to fix it and don't feel like they can even lower the price or aren't there yet. The house is only on the market 7 days and they're shocked by all the findings. That certainly happens. And the buyer's like, forget it. There are so many other fish in the sea. Sellers, I had a couple that were kind of come here from Chicago. They were gung-ho, couldn't wait to move to Denver. They had a very specific area of town they wanted to live in. They wanted a mature neighborhood because they wanted trees. And as they start looking at homes and get a feel for the nature of what is normal for homes of that age, they could not stomach what I was going to tell them they couldn't ask for. Like, no, it's normal that this is going to be in a home of this age. If we go inspect 10 homes, my inspector's telling you this is normal. This home is really good. Now we're going to ask for this and we're going to ask for that. Ultimately, these buyers never even moved to Denver. They terminated on the home that we were looking at that was fantastic with views and a big yard. I mean, it was really wonderful. It had some quirks, things we were going to ask for. And they hightailed it back to Chicago and stayed in their rental and raised their toddler there. They couldn't fathom what it was going to take to own their first home. That happens sometimes. Then I have had a listing where the people had lived in this house for 10 years and just weren't great at keeping it up. They had a gray water leak in their crawl space and just kept thinking they needed to put some cleaner down the drain. And we talked about this. I asked them to have a plumber come. I don't know what they told that plumber, but it didn't get fixed. It was not until our 3rd contract that we got that finalized and addressed. It was the 2nd buyer and their agent who disclosed the issue. Then we got it repaired and the 3rd contract finally made it to closing. All because they just kept waving away the scent that was cluing them into the major issue in their house. So inspection issues can come all across the spectrum. How do we address it, sellers? The ideal scenario is if you've been in your house a long time, get an inspection before you go to market. There are pros and cons to it, discuss it with your agent, but here's a scenario that happened with some folks of mine and it worked like a champ. They had been in their house a long time. We were even in the peaks of the COVID market. But we had had hail big time during that 12 months prior to selling. And I said, have you had your roof looked at? No, they hadn't. They knew that their deck was going to need some attention. So we just had a full inspection. The two things called out: roof, deck, some other minor things. So they spruced up some things around the house that they could DIY, but we addressed the deck with a handyman versus it being called back as a full scrape on inspection, which is typically what happens. The inspector for the buyer will elevate and escalate what the problem is, and having to do a roof once you're under contract, that time compression can really become a challenge. My folks were able to get it done under their insurance at their time frame, deal with the HOA check boxes, and dial down the stress. And we got to market the home as having a new roof. Win-win. So they got 6 figures over list. Are we going to get that today in this market? No, but that's what it accomplished for them. So I am a huge promoter of having your home inspected if you've been in it for a while. There are things you don't even know that are going on. So that's one way to head off the inspection termination in this market and dial back that 35% number, this 80% increase in terminations. All right, after we get the physical piece checked off and we're still moving forward in the transaction, there are still financial check marks and hurdles that have to be accomplished to get all the way to closing. It's possible the buyer isn't feeling quite as excited about the house after the inspection, and some of that comes down to how tense or pleasant the negotiations were to get to inspection resolution. So sometimes the buyer is having a sidebar conversation with the lender and the agent. Can I still get out? What are some play? What are some tactics? What are some deadlines? So you have to know as a seller that they are looking at opportunities if they didn't love everything that showed up, even if they still went on to resolution. Now, that's not what we hope for, but it does happen. Now, let's assume they still want the house, but what are some of the financial hiccups that we are tracking and we want to be proactive to work around so that we're getting everyone to the closing table like they want? Loan issues are a reality. Sadly, they still come up. Sometimes it's the buyers making a mistake. They've gone out and spent money, done things that they shouldn't do. That's not the most common reality. It often has to do with a job. They said they could work remote, or they have a contract that says they're going to be here, but all the contingencies aren't removed. Or they're going to be a physician and they're not licensed and they don't have the credentials. And so the underwriter says, well, you actually can't start work here and you're not going to get a check and you're not going to be employed. So I'm not going to give you the loan because all the things you need to earn money and pay for this house aren't in place. And so unless you as a seller want to continue to defer closing, then closing is not going to happen. You have to either cancel or wait until everything for your buyer falls into place. Or here's one that just came up. Somebody had everything in line to get their house, but one of the buyers just changed their employment structure with their employer because the employer asked. They were W-2, the employer asked them to go 1099, they agreed. Well, but the lender didn't know that. No one had asked for an update recently, but the underwriter's not going to be thrilled because what you bring home on 1099 varies and needs to be vetted. They really need to see how that 1099 income works for you, and they generally want to see that for 2 years. So what's going to happen now for these buyers and those sellers on that house? They may have to entirely restructure that loan. They may have a higher interest rate, a whole lot. So it often has to do with employment verification, vetting, all of those things. So what do we do about that? You, seller, are often not doing much. You need to have an agent who's asking questions of the lender, who's interviewing, who's getting some clarity, and we can't jump every hurdle and get it perfect, but a lot of good questioning, understanding the scenario of the buyer can go a long way to head off a termination over money. And the thing is, a lot of times those happen at the end. They are happening days before closing. And what does that mean for you? It means you are probably moving on to your next thing. You've moved out. You've paid for the movers to come. You have money invested in your next place. And if the buyer gets to terminate on this, they get their earnest money back. So you don't have anything as a safety net for you there. So we really do want to find ways to minimize this risk. This is actually more risky than a termination at inspection because we can work around that. Even the kind of black eye of coming back on after inspection If it was at no fault to you, you have that conversation, you put it in the marketing. This one isn't a black eye, but it costs you. So we have to work around this one the best that we can. And that comes down to communication, understanding, experience, and doing the best you can to vet that out. Now, here's one that's a little bit newer on our scene. This isn't one we would have talked about as much 10 years ago, insurance premiums. All of the US, I actually have a map to show you where we are seeing insurance cancellations or not re-upping insurance policies. And Colorado's not actually even faring the worst, but we are just seeing insurance premiums. The price is shocking to buyers. Related to the insurance premium piece we're going to talk about next is HOAs, the documents related to those. And I have talked about that piece before in another video I'm going to share with you. But we have a deadline in our contract that lets the buyers vet the price of what the home insurance is going to cost for them to insure the property that they've just said, I want to buy. Because why? It is part of the whole package of what they have to pay. We have to leverage that. We have to push the buyer to get that done early, but we can't push them to do it in 3 days because they have to have time for their agent or multiple agents get all the information needed. They're going to ask you, what kind of roof do you have? Are those class 4 shingles? Can you prove they are class 4 shingles? They're going to look for previous claims on the house. The fact that you may have had 3 claims is going to impact what it costs them to insure the house. Their credit score impacts what it's going to cost them to insure the house. There are so many things that go in, so it takes them time. But we are also not going to let them have until 4 days before closing to determine how much it costs them to insure the house. So there's some strategy in play there. They need to get this information and they need to make that decision. I can tell you that insurance premiums have come up much more in conversations with my buyers. I have a client who went to a new build community surrounded by virtually nothing, not dirt, not golf courses, not new trees. And her current insurer, who she's had for over 20 years, said they would not insure her because of fire risk. So she had to go out and shop for all new insurance companies. I have had clients come and be in what I would consider high-risk states. We're talking California, Texas, Florida, and tell me it is more expensive here, and they start shopping around for multiple plans before the deadline that we're writing into the contract for them. And then having conversations with the seller to say, well, hey, who is your insurance company? Who's insuring the house for you? Maybe that'll work for us. And at times, the seller's current insurer says they will not re-up on a new policy. So there is a lot of push, pull, and strategy that can go into figuring out what the insurance is going to look like for the buyer on the property. So be prepared for possibly some, hopefully, warm dialogue or requests from the buyer on this as they try to figure out if they can make it work to buy this home. Now, the next one on the financial front, as I mentioned, HOA docs, or what we call CIC docs. And we're not talking just about the CC and Rs, which are really the rules. Most people think of HOA and they think rules. Well, what we're talking about is, again, money. We have seen so much shift in the cost of the HOA dues, and it's tied to insurance. Most of the time, this is for condos, townhomes. You can check out this video right here where I talk about what has been going on in this arena for cost change, price change, insurability challenges. If you are a seller, whether you are working with me or any other of the fantastic agents, or maybe not as fantastic agents in our market or any other market that is somewhat high risk, I want you to ask that your HOA docs, CIC docs are pulled before you go to market. There are so many buyers who will want to come in and ask questions about your financials, about rules, about potential special assessments. They want to understand before going under contract, before they get serious about your property. They might want to compare yours against 1 or 2 others. If you don't have those documents ready, it can take days, and some of these buyers aren't willing to give it days. And also, I have had agents, when I have serious buyers who understand the concept around the financials and what they need to know, who I've gone and asked, and the agent's answer to me is, we won't pull those till we're under contract. They're essentially saying no. They're not reading the buying signal. And my buyers are like, if that's how they're going to be, I don't even want to work with them. So forget it. So don't be that seller. Don't have your agent be that agent. Be ready, be prepared, be forthcoming. And hopefully you don't have any special assessments. Your HOA's budget is all up to par, you are financially sound, and you look great on paper so they can make a confident buying decision. That is what you can do, and you can lead that charge. So unlike with the lender for the buyer, you are fully relying on your agent. Here you have so much power that you can provide and lead and give in this situation. If we're not being proactive here, what's happening in so many instances, we are getting to the status letter, which is a document that tells the buyer what their HOA dues are, if there are any special assessments, if the HOA has any fines levied on the seller that have to be paid at closing. That comes in just a few days before we get to closing. When the buyer sees that, that is another HOA doc. It falls under the parameters of the purchase contract. From the time they get that, they have 10 days or until closing to choose to terminate, which is why we're seeing terminations. If it's a number they're not expecting, they have to decide, can I make this work? Or we need to renegotiate the special assessment, or forget it, I'm out. And we have seen sellers have to give very large concessions to cover the assessment or cover several years of HOA dues. We have seen buyers just walk away, which again, just like the loan termination, is a bit of a harsh reality for the seller. When you're that close to closing, you've probably already moved out. You've paid your movers. You have a non-refundable deposit. You probably have deposits elsewhere on your next location. You may have something going on with, if you're renting, you're moving, you've got money out elsewhere. And to pull all that back because of this, we do not want that. We had a story just the other day from an agent. She was saying that it was the end of the year, prime time to get a house under contract. They offered on a townhouse, and the seller and the agent came back and said, yeah, we'll take it, but all your earnest money is non-refundable as soon as you go under contract. Not after inspection, nothing else. As soon as you go under contract, and you have to close in 3 weeks. And they were like, really? I mean, this market's not that hot. What's going on? So they didn't bite. They did not sign it. There were 5 other listings in the building, and you're able to call the HOA and get some of this information yourself as a buyer. Not everything, but some. So they did their due diligence and found out special assessment and dues increase, and that seller and agent were trying to not disclose and get non-refundable earnest money. Well, they just bypassed that whole unit and went on to something else. So just don't be those people. Be forthright. Sellers, you have so much you can do to take charge of your home sale. Addressing these challenges head on can mean the difference between getting your deal to closing or having to start over. So in summary, here's your list for success. Pre-inspect your home for common and needed repairs. Be insurance aware and leverage that deadline into your favor. Get those HOA docs early and be forthcoming with all of that information. And have your agent do their best to help you partner with expert and qualified lenders who coach and lead the buyer. You can help not just reduce surprises, but increase trust and confidence in your property, in your sale process, which helps the buyer want to stick around. There is a vast range of emotions in this process for you too, but you can play a large part in how the buyer feels. And there's so many first-time buyers that emotion of, my gosh, I really feel this seller is honest and forthright and has my best interest and wants me to have a good home. That goes so far. And when an agent sees that, they also coach their buyer that you are in a good situation. Because when we see a bad situation and the buyer feels fear, we're like, if you want to go, I'm on your side. So know that you can create an atmosphere that encourages a stick-to-itiveness in the buyer. So own that in every way that you can. And if you want to connect on more ways to decrease your odds of fallout and increase your odds of success, I love to strategize on these things. So please reach out, and I will see y'all next week.